All right, our second philosopher we want to introduce, which actually was Socrates' student, was the famous philosopher Plato. So Plato, in this case, wrote a very famous book. Now, each of these philosophers, right, they write extensively. They have different essays and different collections. So in Plato's book, or the work which is called The Republic, he set forth his sort of general vision of a perfect society. He wanted a group of society not to be ruled by the richest and most powerful, but he had a vision that actually the wisest would be in charge. So the wisest, he referred to them as the philosopher kings. So in this case, creating a society in which the wisest would rule, and again, it goes back to a lot of these philosophers establish that basic principle: ask questions, use analysis, take the time to think, don't make decisions, because when you use that human intellect, you're going to come to the best decisions for the society in a democracy. All right, so our last philosopher I want to introduce is the philosopher of Aristotle. So Plato's student Aristotle examined the nature of the world and human belief, thought, and knowledge. So similar to Socrates and Plato. So in his work, he wrote a work known as Politics. And he wrote, "Man is by nature a political animal, and it is his nature to live in that state." So he encouraged, again, get involved, think. So similar themes for all the philosophers. He did claim the best form of government was a limited democracy. Okay, so similar to what Plato said, right? Democracy, right? But we still want the philosophers, those philosopher kings to rule. Also, Aristotle said we want to be careful, right? If we give everybody the power, maybe people are not as capable. Maybe they're not taking the time to read and develop their intellect, and perhaps they would be making poor decisions for society. So, like the Athenians, the Romans had established a government with separate branches. Remember, branches are two different parts or two different sections of the government. So, in the Roman government, okay, which we get ideas from democracy, they actually had two officials called consuls. And the consuls commanded the army and directed the government. Now, the way it worked in Rome is their term of office was only for 1 year. The legislative branch, remember, when you see legislative branch, you're thinking of the group that makes the laws, was made up of the Senate and two assemblies. So the patricians made up the Senate. It controlled foreign and financial policies and advised the councils. The two assemblies included other classes of citizens. So like in times of war, times of crisis, if something was really happening within Rome, the republic also provided for a dictator or a leader that had absolute power to make laws and command the army. But according to the Romans originally, the dictator was only limited to a 6-month term. All right, and the last piece I want to highlight that the Romans contributed to our discussion of democracy is the concept of Roman law. So, Romans had a great influence on the development of democracy. So, some important principles or ideas of Roman law. One, all citizens had the right of equal treatment under the law. Okay, so that's huge. It doesn't matter if you have money or power, no matter what, if you're a citizen, you have equality. A person was considered innocent till proven guilty. That should sound familiar, folks. That is a concept that develops back in this ancient period. Again, that is also powerful, and that is not something that has continued without history. Plenty of times in plenty of countries, even today, if you get accused of a crime, right, you have to prove you're innocent in that case. The burden of proof rests with the accuser rather than the accused. So again, going back to the fact that you are charged with a crime, they have to prove that you did it versus you trying to prove that you're innocent. And any law that seemed unreasonable or grossly unfair could be set aside. So if anything that was really, it just doesn't fit, it's not working for us, it's not fair, it's not protecting citizens, you could just get rid of it, which also is a pretty powerful concept when you're talking about the concept of law. All right, last thing I want to address in this flip lecture, one of our standards is to analyze different quotes. So we did talk about briefly the contributions of the Greeks and the Romans. So before you open the quiz, I want you to think about these quotes. You do not have to copy them down, but I would definitely pause and think about possibly how this would relate to our discussion of the development of democracy. Okay, so quote number 1 is for tyranny. A tyrant, an abusive leader, someone that takes power, does not share power, and abuses it, is a kind of monarchy which has in view the interest of the monarch only, none of them the common good of all. Aristotle in his book Politics. Number 2, quote, having the knowledge but lacking the power to express it is clearly no better than ever having any ideas at all, by Pericles. And last but not least, one more quote to think about it and also ponder how it relates to you. The price good men, pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. All right, so again, think about those 3 quotes. Those will also be mentioned, hint, on our quiz. All right, so this will go to wrap up our flipped lecture, and keep in mind the quiz is open. It is 10 questions. If you missed anything from the flipped lecture, I would definitely go back and revisit the material and double check your notes before you open the quiz. All right, thank you so much, you guys. Have a great week.